Welcome to Midweek at the Compass. My name is Jake. I'm our online pastor here. We are working through what we're talking about on our weekend services. We just want to have further faith conversations and stories that tie into those weekend messages. We are working through a sermon series called Shattered, finding hope in the book of Job. And this last week for our weekend services, we got to hear about some A-plus names, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. But ultimately, how they weren't great friends to Job. But we also got to hear about this good advice from another epic A-plus name of Elihu, and just how he was ultimately able to give Job some good advice. So we want to have a conversation today about friends and our friendships. And honestly, that's why I'm very excited that we are welcoming our Bolingbrook campus pastor, Mark Lennox, into this conversation. Mark, first off, thank you for being here. Thanks for joining in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here with you.
So honestly, I got to say that the reason I'm excited for this is because I know you and I have some great stories about friendships, maybe that didn't go exactly as planned, that led to a little bit of trouble. And I think that's going to be a nice lighthearted moment here as we're looking through the story of Job, because Job's life was a struggle for a very definitive season. And yet, ultimately, God brought joy at the tail end. Spoiler alert for those of you that are going to be joining weeks to come in this sermon series. But we need to talk about friendships. Job had some friends that did some great things with him. They sat in quiet with him, but ultimately they gave some not great advice. So I just want to open it up to you. And Mark, I know you have one story in particular about friends and friendships that led to a little bit of trouble for you. I wonder if you could, humor me and walk through some of that.
Yeah, thanks, Jake, so much for having me here. Wonderful to be with you and talk about friends. When I was younger, we moved around a lot. And so actually in the beginning years of my life, it's like I'd have friends and then we have to move. And so I kind of went back and forth from the friendships that I had. And then when I was in fifth grade, we moved here to Wheaton. I grew up in Wheaton. And, what was so great is after moving around so much, it was like, I want to have friends. And so I had all sorts of different friend circles. You know how that is. You got your neighborhood friends, you got your school friends, you've got your church friends. And so I had just a lot of different circles of friends. But what I always gravitated towards were kind of the more mischievous friends. I am a missionary kid, so pastors' kids were kind of notorious for, liking to be rebellious.
They have a reputation, yeah.
A little bit of a reputation. And so, I would say I walked with God when I was younger. I was raised in church. And it was really my friendships, though, that oftentimes would kind of pull me away, or I would pull them away. I don't want to just be the victim here. I mean, I was not always the best influence, And, and so growing up through high school, just with the different friends that I have, I had the desire to have fun, the desire for adventure, maybe the desire to be cool. There's all these different desires that were there. I had FOMO. You know what FOMO
absolutely.
is, right?
Fear of missing out.
Fear 100%. Of missing out, and so it's like, hey, what are all my friend groups doing and which is the best to choose from? And, and so much of my journey with God was kind of like, I knew God was real, but my friends were more important. So I would even say I maybe had a little bit of a idolatry of my friendships and, what was going on there. And so, this all kind of culminated when I was 18 years old. And so did some partying and did some different things. I was suspended when I was in school even, and, just did a number of different things. And this kind of culminated senior year, was out with some friends, got arrested. And
okay.
So the thing is that I was 18, so I didn't have to call the parents.
Awesome.
And so I had one of my buddies bailed us out, and, I got home, and, I was pretty freaking that, 2 months before I graduate, that the school was going to find out I wasn't going to be able to graduate. And, it was a pretty nerve-wracking time. But after I graduated, it was almost like I forgot about it. It was like, yeah, I got arrested. Who cares?
Interesting.
Like I said, fun-loving. There's things to do in life, and, this is past. And so just kind of went on with my life. And I was actually at Judson College for a semester. And I'm sitting there, and one night after basketball practice, everybody said, hey, have you ever been to the casino? And I was like, I've never done that. And like I said, fun, something new and an adventure. And so sure enough, I said, hey, I don't have much money, but I got $20, go to the casino. With only $20, I walked out that night. I hit the roulette wheel. I was just winning everything. Everyone started saying beginner's luck, you know? So I walked out with like $400 that night with just 20. So, which for me, college kid, freshman, it was like, whoa.
For working adult, that's still not bad, right?
Working it, yeah, not bad. And so that next morning, I woke up to the phone ringing. And it's my other buddy that I got arrested with like 6 months ago. And he's like, Lennox, we got court this morning. What are you doing? I had totally forgotten about court. I'm getting all nervous. I throw on my clothes. I had the clothes that I had on the night before, right? And so still had the money in my pocket. And, I'm getting to court. And I show up in court. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, real world. It's like you walk into court and there's some people with handcuffs on. And, I was scared. I was like, man, what is going on here? And I'll never forget, I'm walking up to the judge. There was a line to see the judge. Me and my buddy are there. But at the end, I had to stand before the judge alone.
Yeah.
There's some good sermon illustrations in this, by the way. And so I'm standing before the judge, and the judge looks at me and he goes, son, are you guilty or not guilty? And I had to say guilty. And I just remember feeling like this big.
Yeah.
And so I said guilty. And so he looked at me, he goes, well, son, this is going to hurt, but you're going to have to pay for this. And, this is going to cost you. It's going to be $350, I think was the amount.
Yeah.
And I looked at him when I pulled the money out of my pocket. I said, can I pay in cash? I had the money from the night before. Now, I don't know what to do with that. Is that God's grace? I know God's not for gambling, but,
It worked out in your favor, at least in that regard.
It did. But, that was also a really dark time for me. I think things were starting to come to a head with me. Spiritually, I think God was saying, hey, you need to choose. And I was in just a real dark period. It was just a real hard time for me, but that was part of what I think God used to kind of get me out of that.
Totally.
Well, what about you? You got any stories with your friends and growing up?
Putting me on the spot with that, but of course. And I think it's because I grew up in a small rural-ish town. There just wasn't a whole lot to do. So I didn't get arrested, thankfully, but I was part of a friend group that made at least one very poor decision. So we were 16 years old, and we decided for fun, we were going to go around to all of the local businesses in town that we could find and steal their wet floor signs. So we were doing great at it. We got to the point where we were labeling where we took every wet floor sign. My friend had an old hatchback Ford Probe. We would just toss them back there, laugh, and have just the greatest time in the world. And it continued up until we went to the local Pizza Hut. So we devised the plan that one of my friends was going to go in and ask for a job application. Another friend was walking in behind him to follow while everyone else was distracted to grab the wet floor sign. And me, I was the wheelman. I was the one that had to hang out at the car, make sure that we got everything opened. And then I would hop in the back seat and we would all take off and have a great time. And it went off without a hitch, or so we thought. So what actually ended up happening was there was somebody who was working, but was on their break and was sitting in a booth and was watching all of this unfold. So ultimately told their boss, the boss called the cops. So as we were driving through, so this was in Ottawa, Illinois, and downtown Ottawa, there's 2 one-way streets with like 7 or 8 stoplights. That's the entirety of downtown. We get past the first one stoplight on the one-way street heading south, and we see cop lights turn on. Not really thinking anything of it, so we pull over, and then all of a sudden we look behind us and see a second cop car. And then we see a third cop car, which is actually a county sheriff. And no joke, we had bike cops for a season in Ottawa. I don't know if they still do or not, but a bike cop came up as well. And all of a sudden there are all these police lights behind us, and we're wondering what in the world is going on. And one cop walks up to the driver's side door, knocks on the window, and usually, when you get pulled over, you think it's license and registration. Like those are the first words, or do you know why you got pulled over? First words out of this police officer's mouth were, is there a Jake Caputo in the car? I was like, oh, I'm off scot-free. That was the guy driving, not me. So he's in trouble for something else. And so my friend was like, yeah, that's us. He's like, do you know why we pulled you over? And all of us are saying no. So we asked him to step out of the car and had a separate conversation. The other cops came up and talked to me and my friend, and it came to light that they pulled us over for stealing wet floor signs.
You're the wet floor bandits.
The wet floor bandits. That's a great Home Alone 1 reference, I think. Also, I guess 2, it was the sticky bandits. But anyways, okay, I digress. So they walk up to the police, to our car. The police officer starts saying, what you did is no different than stealing a $20 bill out of a cash register. You guys, you're not going to get charges pressed against you. So we're like, okay, breathe a sigh of relief. We are off scot-free. He said, okay, but because he's not going to press charges, all he wants back is his wet floor sign. We said, okay. He said, do you have any other wet floor signs that you've stolen?
Busted.
We said no. Like a genius, we lied. He's like, okay, so go grab the wet floor sign. So we have a trunk full of wet floor signs that are labeled with the places that we have taken them from.
Oh, no.
But because my friend had a hatchback, he went in through. I told him it's all the way on the side. So we knew exactly where we had put it. We got really, really lucky. The fun part of that story is for me, I'll just go on for a couple more seconds here, but my mom works at the emergency room in town, and at that point in time, they had local police officers work as security for the emergency room. I never told my parents any of this until the police officer who pulled us over is like, hey, I pulled over your son the other day. And my mom goes, really? So she let me know what it was for, called me up and said, hey, I want to take you and a couple of friends out for lunch today. I got some time off of work. And I said, great. She said, where do you want to go? I said, I don't know. She looked on the phone. She's like, how about Pizza Hut? And I'm just dead silent because the other end is we are banned for life from the Pizza Hut in Ottawa, Illinois. Now, our pictures aren't up, right? Like I've been back since that time, but this was like 2 weeks after the fact, a month after the fact. I was sweating. So when I didn't say anything, my mom's like, is there anything you want to tell me? So I came clean to her and she said, we won't tell your dad. I told him a little later on. So all's well that ended well. We had a really fun time getting rid of all those extra wet floor signs, and now it's just a great story. I'm not saying any of that to condone stealing. I got really lucky that it could have been so much worse, so much worse. And now it's just a fun anecdotal story to say, don't be like me, pick better friends. But I want to kick it back to you, right? Because you talked about an idolatry of friendship, and your story didn't end with this arrest and going in front of the judge. So tell me what kind of happened next.
Yeah, so what happened next was when I was in that funk and trying to figure out what to do in life, I figured, well, maybe I just need even more adventure and I need a whole new set of friends. And so I decided to drop out of school, take a gap year, and I decided that I would work some, and then I was going to go party over in Europe where they don't have a drinking age, and I can chase foreign girls and, just have a real good time. And so I went over to Europe, and when I was in Europe, I ended up actually hanging out more with missionaries. And that was when God kind of confronted me with, hey, Mark, you think you know what life is all about, but you're wrong. And if you follow me, I'll show you what life is really about. And so kind of went through just a spiritual reawakening and just kind of owning my faith, and was really convicted to kind of say, okay, I need to make a hard stop here. And so there was a vow that I took. And so some of the vow was, man, I gotta stop drinking. I gotta stop doing this. I gotta, tell my friends that I love Jesus.
Interesting. That could be something that gives a lot of people heartburn that are listening of they're okay living out their faith, but sharing their faith is just a whole nother hurdle, including to their friend groups.
It was really hard, Jake. I remember coming back and I told my parents and they were all emotional. I remember the first Friday night. When you're younger, it's like Friday night and Saturday night. That was the night to get in your car. You cruise around, you see, what friends are doing things. And I remember the first Friday night back just feeling this tug of like, oh man, I know what's going on there. I know what's going on there. And I didn't go anywhere. And I remember going home and just really praying and being like, hey, God, I really need to stand firm and put you first. And then, I started getting together with my friends, and they were like, man, Mark, so how were the women in Europe? And, how was the partying? And I love Jesus? And it was really hard at first.
Yeah.
Because there's this spiritual weight that hangs on you with your friends. And it's really that thing of idolatry. Like when you put the weight of what your friends think about you more than God, it weighs on you. And so through God's grace and power, I was able to break through that. And I remember just a freedom that came about in my life to where I was like, after a while, I was like, wow, this feels, I'm going to go tell more friends about Jesus.
Yeah.
And then I just started going around, and then everybody knew that, man, something's happened in Lennox's life. And it was really the beginning of just a journey that God took me on. But if I hadn't broken through and kind of said, hey, I need to figure out how my friends have influence on me and how I influence them. And if they're influencing me more in bad ways, there's something wrong with that. And so I took that to heart. And for 2 years, I just was really kind of without as many friends and just kind of retweaking but that was the time that I developed my friendship with God. And that's where that became the most important thing in my life.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, right? You talked about, are they being a good influence on me or am I being on them? I've heard the analogy of a thermometer versus a thermostat, right? Like, are you reading the temperature of the room or are you setting the temperature of the room? And there's a very real difference. So when it comes to your friendships, how did you get to a point where you were comfortable being the one setting the temperature of the room? Or maybe to put it a different way, how did you start to grow in feeling like you could give godly advice to friend groups that maybe didn't even want to hear it at that point?
I think when I broke through the fear of what others think, the fear of people pleasing, the fear of, hey, maybe I'm not going to be cool anymore, all those fears that swirl around in our souls. It's like once that got broken, it was like a breath of fresh air. And then I just kept depending on God. And it was like step by step. Each time I stepped out with God and I said, okay, I'm going to share with this person, I'd share with the person, and then the person would be like, wow, Mark, that's really interesting. I've had kind of similar thoughts. Or, wow, that's really cool. I'm really glad. It was like the response that I got from people was completely different than what I thought I was going to get.
Yeah.
And then, some of my friends kind of walked away, but it was so key, the kind of, I'm going to put God first. I'm going to stand up for what I believe, and I'm going to put myself out there. And I'm just going to see what God does with that. And then it was amazing how it was like the Spirit just got more on fire in me, if you want to say. And it was like I lost all fear. And then it was like I was speaking at the chapel at my school. I got invited to youth groups. It was like all of a sudden people are like, wow, we want to hear the testimony, because God's doing something in this guy's life. And so I think there's something about just getting God deeply ingrained in your soul and putting him first that helps.
Yeah, so instead of just giving godly advice, I want to take the flip side of the coin too, right? We hear about Job receiving advice that, wasn't actually the best advice from 3 of his friends, but ultimately got to the point where Elihu was telling him something and it ended up being sound. How do you get to the point where you can differentiate between what maybe seems like good advice from friends, but isn't actually God-honoring, to actually hearing and understanding which advice is God-honoring? Like if you could put yourself in the shoes of Job, just maybe in your personal experience, how have you gotten better at receiving and understanding godly advice?
I think some of the ways is just looking at the person's lives and looking at where are they coming from, what's their context. Is this a person that even values God in their life, or are they living for something else? So if I see the context, the background of how the person is living, that gives me a filter for how I'm going to receive advice from them and how I'm going to engage with the things that they're saying to me. Receiving advice, there's so much to that too, of like, you got to check the ego and you got to stay humble. There's a portion to whenever someone comes to me, if I'm defensive right away, that's a sign that there's probably something there that's either true or there's something that I'm being prideful. So no matter what, when a friend comes to me, if they're really my friend, you need to look at that too. Like, hey, is this person trustworthy? Is he someone that is a friend? You got to have some boundaries, right? Like
Totally.
You're not just letting anyone speak into your life. But once the person says something, your reaction to what they say also can tell you things about, what they're saying. And so if I'm really defensive, I've got to go pray about it, or go look at it. But there's something about checking the ego and staying humble that as a Christ follower is so key. And of like all people, we should be able to do that, right? Like,
Absolutely.
Why do we need to prove ourselves? We've already been given God's grace, and so of anyone, we should be able to receive from our friends, advice. Now, one of the things that I will do is, sometimes people come up to me and give me advice, and it's like, whoa, like that's shocking, that's new. One of the things that I've learned to do is maybe, you're not being defensive, but one of the things I'll do is say, hey, I need to pray about that, and I'll get back to you. There's something about that, because some advice is overwhelming, and some people want to get preachy or whatever, and it's, they love speaking truth more than they speak truth in love.
Totally.
And so what I've learned, one of the things I like to say is like, man, that might be really good. Thank you. That's really interesting. I use that word a lot. That's really interesting. Can I pray about that, and I'll get back to you? And then that gives me some time to process and buffer and hear from God.
So now I know that your code word is interesting. So when you bring that up in a conversation with me, I'll be like, okay, well, we got that now. So just tell me a little bit now of what does your friend group look like currently? You give us a little bit of an example of, what types of people do you feel like fall into this group of people that you would call friends at the moment?
Yeah. What's really interesting is when I was younger, what I looked a lot for was that deep connection, the intimacy, but combined with like the adventure and the fun. And so when I started working, as you know, I was a missionary for a bunch of years, and I was overseas. I started to realize like some of the friendship or things I thought was friendship, it was like a counterfeit or a shadow side of what real Christian friendship or soul friends look like.
Yeah.
And, I started generating friends in the different places that I worked with people that would love me better, than other friends did. But then we also did mission of God that was an adventure. And I started realizing, I'm like, ooh, man, things that I gravitated towards that were bad for me when I'm younger, it's kind of how God wired me up. But now I'm actually putting into it in a way that's healthy and with people that are godly friends, that's fun. And so, I found, we're going in the Amazon jungle with a good friend, Oscar. Oscar was here a couple years ago and shared his story.
You
right?
translated for him, right?
I translated for him, and just different people that I realized like, oh, this is godly friendship, and this has all the components that I used to want to have, but now it's on the side of God's kingdom and in relationships that are healthy and full. And so,
so personally, I've had a little bit of a different shift in terms of friendships. And it all stemmed from the fact that my wife and I moved into a new house about 6 months ago from the time we're recording this. I realized that predominantly my friendships were growing more and more to be only with people in the church, which there is nothing wrong with having friends inside the church, friends that love Jesus. I think that's incredibly important. So I'm not underselling that. But what I realized was I was having a harder and harder time being able to tell which people were friends of mine that didn't fall into that camp. And what happened is, as we moved into a new subdivision, and my wife was more or less strategically saying, we are going to be missional in how we are thinking and living here. We want to know our neighbors. We want to get to be part of our local subdivision community. And that's been a really interesting shift. And I'm not doing nearly as well with it as she has, because I like to say it all the time. My wife is better than me at everything. And this is a part of it as well. But what we've been doing is spending intentional time trying to get to know people, to have a larger friend group outside of the church, to ultimately be able to share the hope of Jesus, and not doing it on day one. Right now, what we're doing is relationship building. We're getting involved in our kids' schools. My wife convinced me to let us sign up for the neighborhood pool that's there. I had no desire to spend that kind of money, but she was very clear of, if we are saying we want to know our neighbors, this is where they will be all summer. And so we are going to be there all summer. So I said, okay, you know what? Like, I can't argue with that. So she's done a great job of getting phone numbers of neighbors and kids' friends of just the parents to be able to start building those relationships. And the really funny thing to me is it's rubbed off on our kids. So my youngest, Emmett, is 5. And we just took him to a King County Cougar game. And Emmett has no reservations about making friends with anyone on a playground or a bounce house or whatever. If you are near his age, he's going to make friends with you, and he's going to think you're best friends forever. So this happened while we were at the King County Cougar game. He found like another little 4 or 5-year-old boy, and they were playing together on the bounce houses. And what ended up happening is they were having fun, and about an inning later, this family ended up peeling off to leave. And my son went up to the mom and said, "Could I have your phone number?" And she cracked up like it was the funniest thing in the world. But I realized that he had heard my wife saying something similar so much lately that it's just become ingrained. Like we're trying to get used to a new community, so we're asking for people's phone numbers to be able to have dinner with them or grill out or meet up at the pool. And it's rubbing off.
That's awesome.
Our kids are going to catch things like that more than they're going to catch just sitting down and drilling theology into their head.
Yeah.
So I want to ask just one last thing, and just kind of open-ended. Is there anything that you would want to get to about friendships overall that you didn't have the chance to yet? I just kind of want to lay it out and say the floor is yours.
Yeah. And that's so interesting. That's like family on mission you're talking about there. That is so great. And I could totally relate to that. When I was overseas, it felt like majority of my friends were either non-believers or, somewhere different in their spiritual walk. And now being back here, majority of my work in the church, same exact thing. And we just moved into a new house, as you know. Yeah. And so got the same thing of like, hey, what can we do to get to know the neighbors more and be a little more intentional? And I miss it. I miss having friends from all different places in their walk with Jesus. It's just it's a fun feeling to have that variety and know that you're having an impact or that you're relating to people in different places with their spiritual journey. One of the things I think about with friendship, friendship is such a key thing. It's such an important thing. And it's free.
Yes, most of the time.
Yeah. I even think about like how much does our nation pay to go see counselors? And, and if you have a good friend, it's like they can do so much. And, one of the things I was thinking about as I was coming here to talk is like, how many of us do audits on how much money we have, where our money's going, or maybe we're thinking about our investments. We're planning out our degrees. We're planning out our degrees for our kids. How many of us really take the time to sit down and look at our friendship world and do an audit of our friendship?
Interesting.
And different people would have a range probably of how many friends that they could have. Like 20 to 80 people, maybe depending on how introverted, extroverted they are. Like where would you think you fall of the 20 to 80?
So I'm a little more introverted than I think most people would realize, especially because of my job. I'd like to say that I'm a stage extrovert, but overall, I'm probably more introverted than not. So a good range of friends that I would say would be like good friends. I don't know that I could get past 30 to 35 personally. Like that sounds daunting even saying that out loud. Right. So I would probably skew towards the lower end of that range of people that I would call friends, and then within that good friends.
Yeah, and introvert, extrovert doesn't mean that you don't have friends, right? Sometimes the introverts have the deeper, better quality friendships,
Absolutely.
right? And so, but I think saying, hey, what's my range? How many could I handle? And then doing a friendship audit and just saying, hey, who are maybe some old friends that I've kind of lost touch with? Not because intentionally, like they've just gotten out of my life. And, and maybe you're kind of fine that they're out of your life, but maybe God puts a tug on your heart. It's like, yeah, reach out to them. Like they should be a part of that 30 people or whatever, and then, what's the amount of friends that you have at work? What are the friends that you have in your neighborhood? What's the balance of friends? It's like a good portfolio, when you're doing an audit of your investments, you kind of want to balance. I say the same thing with friendships. You want to figure out what's the balance that leaves for a healthy life. And then I would also say, what are the friends that really are giving you life and that are intimate? Like if you look at Jesus's life, this is the Son of God, came to earth, and he very strategically did relationships and friendships in a very specific way. And so interesting that as a discipler, he said to his disciples, you are my friends. Later on in his discipleship journey with them, most rabbis would never have said that. Jesus did. He took friendship very seriously. But if you look at, he had the three really close friends, James, John, Peter, that were the more intimate. And then he had that next layer of friendship. And so as we look at our friends, which are the ones that we really want to invest more time in? What's the next layer of friendship? And then what's the third layer out there that they're still friends, but you're not going to be hanging out with them a long time. And what would it look like to take serious and say, hey, I'm really weak in this area, or I could double down. Maybe even just asking someone, it's like, hey, man, I guess this could get really weird, right, Jake?
Sure.
Like, hey, do you want to be my soul friend?
Yeah, I don't think I would phrase things that way. No, I might say, do you want to go to a Cubs game? But a little different. Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed is, just opening up spiritually or even asking to pray with someone. There's just something about that knits people's hearts together in friendship. But this idea of really investing in friendships, I wonder how many people's lives are so much less rich and abundant just because they haven't taken this serious, this idea and calling to friendship. And what if our church, when people came to our church, they're like, wow, these people have friendships like I've never seen before. You ever been around people that like you could just tell it's like they have a friendship that's different?
Yeah.
And you kind of want it, right? Like there's a draw and there's a desire. And so, I dream of the day where we really take friendship seriously and realize the power and the spirituality behind it.
I love that. I don't know that I would have ever thought about taking a friendship audit, but I think that's a really good, tangible step that people joining in could do. Honestly, sit down and list the people out that you would say are friends, and then good friends, and then like your core really great friends, and find out what areas you're weakest in, right? Like it should be the circles. You've got a small group in the closest, and then a little bit more and a little bit more. And if the numbers aren't lining up, or you would say, I feel like I have 50 close friends and nobody beyond that, then maybe you've got some work to do. Or if you say, I don't know that I have more than one like core intimate friend, be intentional with what that looks like to build a friendship to get to that level. You get nowhere in life on accident. You just don't. Everything that you do moves you in a certain direction. Now, it's just whether or not you've planned for it that can make a little bit of a difference. So all that said, Mark, honestly, thank you for coming in and doing this. Thank you for letting everybody in our church family and beyond know that you've been arrested as a pastor.
Oh, boy.
Sorry for me stealing wet floor signs. Ottawa, Illinois, I apologize. But it's been a blast having you here and hearing those stories. And then just honestly, the thoughts of friendship, moving beyond that, moving beyond an idolatry of friendship, and then growing in our friendships all at the same time, I think is really good to be able to not just hear, but to apply. So appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Thanks for having me, Jake. Wonderful to be here.
And with that, I want to say thank you all for being here. We're going to continue having these conversations here coming up through the rest of this sermon series. So make sure you come back next week and join us here at Midweek at the Compass.